Well, good morning, everyone. Glad to get a chance to be able to visit with you. Let me first say my prayers and condolences and all of our attention at Ohio State University right now as we watch what's unfolding there, and obviously we're all extremely attentive to that. I want to get a chance to chat with you today about the release as well, though, of our second annual book called Federal Fumbles. This is the way that the federal government has dropped the ball. And what we're trying to focus in on is not trying to pick on one particular agency or entity, but to say we've got to be able to pay attention. And we're really dealing with four different main areas as we walk through this. Grants that need oversight, regulators and regulations that need oversight, agency bureaucracy and inefficiency, and then a lack of coordination between agencies. For every one of these, as we did last year, we're focused on the same thing. We're not just trying to raise the problem, we're also trying to raise how do you solve it. Whether it's an administration action, whether it's a piece of legislation, whether it's just coordination between the two, or some of those things that have already happened, we just haven't actually engaged in it enough to be able to provide the oversight needed to actually get the coordination. Every single one of these, we identify, here's the problem, here's an issue, and here's how to actually solve it. This is not a comprehensive book. This is not trying to list everything in the federal government that there is an issue. We're trying to find some key areas that we can identify and say, here are some problems that we've seen and some things that we find as common ground solutions. This builds on last year's book. As you know from last year's information that we put out, we also try to focus in on those things this last year. Many of those things are still unresolved. But we have been able to make some progress in some of these. Of the 100 things that we've listed here of ways that we see the federal tax dollars being misused and how federal agencies and entities, including this Congress, is not fulfilling its mandate, we listed out several that we thought that would be interesting to most folks to be able to see, and we thought surely we can find common ground to solve these. Things like the NIH did a study of about $2 million to study how children perceive food, including testing to see when food is sneezed on, if 5-year-olds will still eat the food. Now, I think we could have answered that question for less than $2 million, but that's one of them that's out there. A push by the USDA to try to see if they can get more healthy food options to people that are recipients of SNAP. Again, that is a good idea, that when we deal with food stamps or SNAP, to be able to make sure there are healthy food options. But instead of focusing in on the healthy food option, they're pushing for the place that they're actually purchasing the healthy food option. Targeting places like convenience stores and gas stations that also provide for SNAP benefits. Trying to make sure that they don't actually sell a high number of hot items, which are not eligible, by the way, for SNAP, but enforcing to them that you can't sell hot items and as well as take SNAP, or if you're going to sell SNAP, you have to also sell, no kidding, if you're at a gas station or convenience store, if you're going to provide SNAP benefits to people, you also have to provide tofu, almond milk, fresh shrimp or fresh catfish, or goat cheese. I don't know how many of you have been to a convenience store and purchased tofu or fresh catfish, but it's an unrealistic option. And what it's doing is it's causing retailers that are out there, especially in rural areas or in food deserts in urban areas, to say we're not going to provide SNAP benefits to people because we're not going to cut back on our hot food items, or we're not going to provide tofu and other things. That takes away in rural areas and in food deserts and in urban areas a place to get milk, a place to get bread, a place to get lunch meat, a place to get basic things like fruit for those people that are on SNAP. So it has a negative effect. Over 800 different times, the GAO has referenced a report on how to deal with legacy technology problems that we have in the federal government. We spend $80 billion a year in the federal government on technology. 2/3 of the recommendations from the GAO on how to deal with our technology issues have not been addressed. What does that mean? That means some of our nuclear arsenal is still being handled on technology with floppy disks. That means that we have lots of spending going on in multiple agencies where the spending is happening maintaining old legacy hardware and old legacy software rather than dealing with the issues of how to handle and update technology for today. We've got duplication issues. We've got problems that are around federal foreign aid, which has been an ongoing issue, and that we've made recommendations on. When we deal with foreign aid, we should simply deal with foreign aid that is to the benefit of the United States. We don't think it's an unreasonable request. Instead, at times, we deal with foreign aid like studying fish bones in Tanzania and doing massive research on how old cultures in Tanzania functioned by studying the fish bones and ceramic pottery from that time period. Doing grave digging in Iceland, which we have paid for recently, to be able to study the cultures in the 8th century to the 12th century in Iceland. I'm not sure what the connection to the American economy is to that and how that helps us long term to do grave digging in Iceland, but that's one of the things that we paid for. We also paid for British citizens to be able to come to the United States to watch American volunteers. Now, that does seem like an ultimate irony to me that we're paying British citizens to come watch American volunteers so they can learn more about volunteering, but not as much as it was that we paid British journalists to come to the United States to learn about the American election system. When we target foreign aid, we need to make sure that foreign aid is specifically targeted to be able to help us long term, including areas that we have identified, things like Central America. In Central America, in the Northern Triangle, we have designated aid of $750 million targeted towards anti-corruption, reducing violence, and economic development. But instead, millions of dollars of that have been diverted into climate change work. When we're focused on anti-corruption, reducing violence, and economic development, that is a solid development for our hemisphere and for United States security. We need to make sure that we're emphasizing the area that it should be emphasized and that we stay on the focus for that. I can tell you there have been some areas of progress in the past year, and we'll continue to focus in on that. We highlighted last year some work on subsidized wind. 25 years ago, the United States determined that we were going to help wind power get off the ground in the United States. Now, 25 years into it, wind power is a very viable industry providing clean power to the United States. It's a good industry to have. It's a good part of our power grid. It does not need to continue to be subsidized. It is $6 billion a year, every year that we extend that subsidy. And for a technology that's 25 years in advance and is doing very well, we don't need to spend $6 billion on that. We were able to work through that process and the last year get a phase out of that wind subsidy. That's a win as we've gone through this. We had a win in things like 25,000 individuals that do not qualify for HUD subsidies. That was recognized, the Inspector General had located, but HUD had not taken any action on it. We were able to get into an appropriations bill, acknowledgement that that IG report has come out and that the HUD has to actually implement those recommendations. This is not taking away HUD from anyone who meets the qualifications. This is simply acknowledging 25,000 people don't meet the qualification, yet they're still getting the subsidy. We need to address that. So we've got multiple other examples that we list as touchdowns and forward progress in the back of the book that are some of the details from last year and as we move forward into this year. I would just say this is not about targeting Republicans, Democrats, any administration. Bureaucracy is bureaucracy, and inefficiency is needed in every government, and inefficiency is present in every government. This is an issue of oversight. We need to have this Congress more engaged in oversight. We need to have an administration engaged in oversight. And regardless of who's in the White House or who's in this Congress, we should address these issues. With $19.5 trillion worth of debt, this is something that cannot be ignored. If we don't get economic activity and we do not control our spending, this doesn't get better in the days ahead, it gets worse. So we try to identify $250 billion in this report of inefficient use of federal tax dollars to try to give us a jump start on what we would hope would be common ground. With that, let me open up for some questions. Yes, sir. Hey, Chris.
Senator Tom Coburn started this annual wasteful thing, and I think it was maybe his last one. They put Congress at the top of his list for a variety of reasons, right. Oversight being one thing. But I was wondering, the ledge branch budget this year, I think, was about $4.5 billion. Do you think taxpayers got their money's worth out of Congress this year? I mean, and if so, why?
Yeah, Congress should be at the top of the list as far as oversight. Quite frankly, all judgment starts at home. You have to be able to evaluate that in your own office, in your own functioning, your own operation. You should be able to operate in the area that we work around. So when we deal with the ledge branch and we deal with the work of the ledge branch, that should be a primary part of it. As you know extremely well, the Congress has a function. We're writing law and we oversee those laws that are done. And that primary constitutional role includes oversight of what we do and of what happens in every other area of the administration. And when the administration doesn't have good oversight, that's Congress's first responsibility.
So you have some amounts that are relatively small. I mean, not
right.
That one, but I mean, would you be able to find a $10,000 and a $100,000 item in your own office?
We can, I'm sure. And the issue that I want to look at with this is not intended to be exhaustive. This is a set of ideas to say this is the kind of stuff that we can look for and should look for. Yes, sir.
Senator, what's been your interaction with the Trump transition team about the book and about these ideas in the book?
We have not released this to the transition team. I would hope that we'll be able to work with the Trump presidency in the days ahead to be able to address this. We worked with the Obama administration and tried to raise these issues to them. For instance, one of the issues that's in this is DHS. Their HR program for the last 13 years has failed to do some very basic combining of functions there, and it's been just a disaster. Met with their group. They have gone to great lengths to try to fix it. In fact, they punted the last plan and the plan before that and said, we've got a new plan that we're going to put in place to try to move forward on it. Again, it's our responsibility to be able to work with this DHS and the next one to make sure that actually gets implemented. There's no reason it should take 13 years to roll out an HR piece. The Obama team at DHS has addressed that, and we hope that can get done. So again, with any White House, we should be able to get that done. Yes, ma'am.
Senator Donald Trump on the campaign trail talked a lot about, and since he was elected, talked about an infrastructure bill. He also wants to increase the size of the military. All of that's going to cost a lot of money.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, how do you reconcile his positions with your study that you're releasing today and your focus writ large on cutting unnecessary spending?
Yeah, if you deal with anything as large as we are, there will always be areas of waste. Always. When you deal with billions of dollars, you're not going to be able to catch every dollar. It's important we keep the oversight on it. When you deal with what Donald Trump has raised specifically on military and on infrastructure, those are primary functions of government. Those are things that we need to do. If we're not doing national defense, if we're not doing basic infrastructure, we're not fulfilling our primary responsibility. So my first question will be, how do we pay for it? Those are primary responsibilities. We're in debt. We have serious deficit spending. How do we pay for that? I would suggest the first thing we do is look at things that are not our primary responsibility and areas where we have waste and say, we can't do this because we have to be able to do that. If we're going to do national defense, if we're going to do infrastructure and we need to, that means we can't do as much of this other stuff that we would like to do. Does that make sense?
Are you concerned though with what you're hearing about from the Trump team on their part?
Yeah, there's not been the specifics yet. I think there's been plenty of talking back and forth on things like the infrastructure program. This cannot be another big deficit stimulus plan. That stimulus plan clearly added a tremendous amount of debt to our economy, but we've not seen any single year in the past 8 years of 3% growth. So we can't just do another deficit like that. Yes, sir.
Senator Lankford, I wanted to build on that question, though. We've got the symbolism versus viability on examples Mr. Trump has presented, like the wall between the U.S. and Mexico. Are you concerned about spending for symbolism that doesn't have a viable outcome?
Yeah, we don't have money to be able to spend on symbolism. We need to be able to actually have finances to be able to spend on solutions. If it solves an issue, then that's a primary issue where we need to be able to spend dollars. But we need to be attentive on how we do it. So that's contracting issues. That's how we actually do the spending. That's who actually oversees it through the process. All of those things matter. When you get into all of our federal contracting, this group knows extremely well because y'all tracked it for a long time. There's not a good process in federal contracting. It costs too much. It's too complicated. We have fewer companies that actually submit bids to actually engage in contracting now than ever. And the reason of that is that we continue to have a situation where it's so complicated and so difficult, we have a diminishing number of companies that want to engage into it. So that has to be fixed. Yes, sir.
One thing that I think that Trump might say about the infrastructure plan is that it would stimulate the economy, create jobs, it would bring the government money, and so would you support an infrastructure plan if it would add to the deficit or?
So we just did a $310 billion infrastructure program and highway bill that just came through. We're working on a WRDA bill right now as well. We do need to have infrastructure. We do need to have investments in those areas. That's important just to be able to keep basic commerce going. But if the conversation is if only the federal government will spend more money, then the economy will get better, it never recovers that way. You have to have private investment dollars that actually do that. So if there are ways that we can get the economy going with private dollars, that's the way to be able to jumpstart the economy, not by doing investments in infrastructure. Now, the infrastructure needs to happen, but if that's the plan for economic development, that plan won't work. Yes, sir.
Senator, your report mentions $1 billion in infrastructure improvements for the Palestinian Authority. When Congress appropriated that money, was there a concern it might fall into the hand of terrorist entities?
Yeah, that always is a concern for us, and that's one of the areas that needs great oversight. Anytime that you allocate dollars in anything in foreign aid, you're concerned about where it goes and how it is spent and the oversight of it. That's one of the reasons that I've said we can't just do cash. We need to be able to provide ways that we have specific ways that we target this program, this supply, whatever that may be, that we know exactly what it is going to at any time. That's why we've had such a great partnership with the Jordanians, for instance, in national security for them, in training the police force for the Palestinians in Jordan and partnering with them. There are ways that we can actually help and stand alongside the Palestinian people and the nation of Israel, and to be able to make sure that we're actually engaging in a peace effort there without just dollars. Yes, sir.
Just so we get on camera, could you talk just a little bit about the medieval smells?
Yeah, there are 100 of these, and some of them are a little more malodorous than others in their fragrance and their waste. There are 3 different agencies that have partnered together to be able to fund a medieval smells museum event that would give you the full medieval experience. Now, again, if we're going to have museum experiences, I have no issue with having museums, with having exhibits. But this is, again, 3 different entities all partnering all their dollars together to be able to do it. And I just asked the question, shouldn't one entity do this if we're going to do it? And is there a private entity that would want to do it? I'm not opposed to every grant. I'm not opposed to science. I'm not opposed to all those things. I asked the question first on grants. How does it help our national security? How does it help us as a nation to continue to grow and prosper economically? Is there a private sector entity that would actually fund this and would do it more efficiently probably than what we could do from a government level? But I always ask the question about duplication, and it raised my suspicion when I have 3 different entities all co-funding the medieval smells exhibit.
You mentioned the Iceland grave digging thing.
Yeah.
Did you have a dollar figure for that? You didn't mention
I do. I can pull it out for you. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head right now, but yeah, I'll pull it out. But Icelandic grave digging. Yes, sir.
Senator, just to follow up on that point, are you saying that the Mexican wall is symbolism and shouldn't be funded? Because I know you
No.
were talking about symbolism, but he did reference the wall.
No, I would not say it's symbolism. Anytime you deal with national security, especially border security, first things first. We have to be able to secure the border. Part of that will be a wall. Part of that will be some sort of fence, some sort of way to be able to have physical barrier between borders. Some of that you can't do. For instance, between Texas and Mexico, the international border is the middle of the Rio Grande River. You're not going to be able to put a wall or a fence in the middle of a river. So there has to be a different set of solutions. So the perception that you just put up a wall across the entire entire border is not accurate. You can't do that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Last question, please.
Yes, sir.
Senator, you talked about congressional oversight here a moment ago, Congress not doing its job. And doesn't that relate a little bit to this concept of executive overreach and the executive exercising powers that the Congress doesn't give to it?
Right.
Of course, we'll have a Republican administration, and I'm just wondering if you're prepared to push back against a Republican administration in order to have Congress exercise more of its discretion and more of its responsibility.
No, bureaucracy and waste is the same whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. There will always be waste just based on the size of government, and there always will demand oversight. So I am committed to doing oversight the same with a Republican president as a Democrat president, because we're still going to have the same issues in agencies and still have the same questions that we'll raise of why do we do this. When we deal with grants, for instance, and a lot of the big news, whether that be medieval smells or whether it be Icelandic grave digging, those are grant issues. And I ask simply the question, what's the structure of how we do grants? When we released this book last year, we had administration officials and some of the different grant-making entities that came to us and said, here's how we do grants. And so I asked the basic question, what's the standard that you set for all the different groups that make decisions on grants? And I could not get a clear answer from anyone. The issue is, if we don't have a standard for grants, we have $600 billion a year going out of the door from federal tax dollars just on grants. If there is no structured way to be able to handle what's a yes or a no on grants, that never gets better, whether Republican or Democrat. So yes, it needs oversight. Overlapping of government agencies still needs oversight, whether it's Republican or Democrat. Inefficient decision-making still has that there. So my desire is to be able to see this fixed regardless of who's there, because it will always need attention, whether it's Republican or Democrat. So that is my focus. We'll let you peruse through this. We're putting it online. It's on our website, lankford.senate.gov. to be able to get this and to be able to go through it. My hope is that, again, it's a starting point. You'll see some very small, as Chris referenced earlier. There are some of them that are $10,000. There are some of them that are $20 billion. We tried to just pick examples that we saw, and these are areas that our staff saw as we went through the past year and identified, here's a problem, can't we find some agreement on some of these things and to be able to work through it. Again, if we put every one of these things into place, we still haven't solved the deficit. So this is a long-term issue over multiple years, but we've got to find some areas of agreement. And hopefully with this and the book that we put out last year, we'll continue to be able to find areas where we can actually try to get us back towards balance. So thanks for being here. We look forward to putting these things to work.